Hello and welcome back to Weekends with YSJ, a video series where we make a game using YSJ.net. Today we're going to work on adding bullets to our game. So let's go ahead and add a new class. We'll just call it Bullet. And let me paste in some code. So you can see bullet derives from game object just like the player and the wall do. It has x velocity and y velocity, right? So these are new, right? So just like player and wall, it has x and y coordinates, but it also has x and y velocity. And so that will basically determine what direction it's going to go. In this game, at least currently, it will only have an x velocity or a y velocity. So like, for example, it might have an x velocity of 1 and a y velocity of 0, or maybe a y velocity of -1 and an x velocity of 0. So the bullets will only move in straight lines, but it has both properties. It also has a Boolean called delete, which will set to true when it's marked for deletion. This is just so that we avoid deleting items while iterating through a list. So when we delete the bullets, we're going to iterate through a list of bullets, and we can't delete the bullet as we're going through the list because it would mess things up. So instead, we'll mark it for deletion by setting this Boolean, and then delete it once we're done iterating through the list. And then this here is just the constructor. So we set up the x and y velocity, set delete to false, and then the x and y coordinates are sent to the base constructor. So that's our bullet class. So let's go ahead and go to GameGrid, and we're just going to set up our bullet here. Okay, so we have a list of bullets. And this would just be used to keep track of all the bullets in the game. We could technically not create this list and just keep track of the bullets because they are within the grid. But this will make things a little bit more efficient so that whenever we are searching for bullets, we can just iterate through this list instead of having to iterate through every single square in the grid and search for the bullets. So that's why we're storing them in this list here. So there's that. We need to create it in the constructor. There we go. Whenever we write to grid, whenever we add something new to the grid, if it's a bullet, we need to add it to the bullet list, right? So let me just add that code in, right? So our game object E to be written to the grid. We're going to take our game object G. We're going to check the type. If it's a bullet, we will cast to bullet, and then we will add it to the list. So this ensures that every single time a bullet is added to the grid, a bullet is added to the bullet list. So our bullet list will contain all of the bullets within the grid. And the last thing we need to do is we need to move the bullet. So let me add that in here. So for each bullet in the list, we're going to do movement_attempt_write_to_grid. Right, so if you remember movement_attempt_write_to_grid, this is what we used for the player to move the player. And it just takes an object, it takes, because it takes that object, it contains the old coordinates of the object, right, the current coordinates, and then it explicitly takes the new coordinates of where you want to move that object, and then it attempts to move the object, right, so the object can move into an empty space. So we will just send that in there, and then you'll notice we're sending our bullet, and then the place where it wants to move to, the new coordinates, are its current coordinates, so bullet x, plus the x velocity, right? So the x velocity will either be 0, in which case it's not moving in the x direction, -1 moving to the left, or +1 moving to the right. And then same thing with y, right? 0, -1, or +1. So the x and y coordinates will each either move by 0 or 1. Again, it's not going to be moving diagonally. Okay, so let's make sure that this compiles. Okay, cool. And let's go ahead and make some bullets. So in our initial setup, we'll create a new bullet. So if we look here, we're sending it x and y of 10 and 15, so there's a coordinate we'll be at. X velocity is 1, so it should be moving to the right, and y velocity is 0, so it shouldn't be moving in the y direction. So there should be a bullet created at the coordinates 10, 15 moving to the right. So let's see if that works. There is no bullet. Okay, so one possibility here is that we might have neglected to include it in Game Canvas Paint. So let's add this in here. Run that. There's my bullet right there. Okay, so I just needed to paint it to the grid. Awesome. Okay, so we've got our bullet, and then you notice as I move the player, right, the game canvas is being updated, but the bullet is not actually moving. That's because we created the move bullets function, but we never actually called it. So, right, so here it is. Game grid, move bullets. So if I go in here, whenever I click the up button, we're going to do grid, right, which if you remember is our game grid object, right, this guy right here. Grid dot move bullets, right? And I'm doing that before the player movement so that the bullets move before the player. That way if you shoot a bullet, it will always remain in front of you. Think of if you shoot a bullet to the right and you keep moving to the right. If the bullet moves before the player, that'll keep the player from running into it. And let me just add that to every direction. There we go. And run this. There we go. Now my bullet is moving. And you notice it's moving to the right because, again, remember my velocity, my x velocity is 1. So the next thing we need to do is add buttons so that the player can click those buttons and shoot bullets in different directions. Okay, so let's go ahead and add some buttons that we can click to move the bullets. So we're going to go to the designer here, page1.cs. And let's go ahead and add some labels. So these buttons here are for moving. And we'll add a new label because we're going to add some buttons for shooting. Now I want these buttons to look pretty much identical to the previous ones. Let's do that. Okay, let's copy these buttons. So Control C, Control V. Control C, Control V. Control C, Control V. Control C, Control V. And if I open the properties window, so if I click here, I can open the properties of my button. You can see they are named button 1, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And just like with my move buttons, so I named those button right, up, left, and down. We'll call them shoot. So this will be shoot up. Alright, so here this is called button on, button 1, shoot up. This is shoot right, shoot down, and shoot left. And then each of these needs a click event, so if I just double click on it, that will create the click event. And there we go, we've got click events for all of our buttons. So, okay, so every time a button is clicked, we need to move the bullets because, again, just like with moving the player, right, it's the game grid is being updated, which means the bullets need to move. And then, of course, we need to create our new bullet. So it's going to look something like this. So grid.moveBullets, again, that's the same exact thing we were doing here, right? Like when I click to move the player. Write to grid, we're writing a new bullet. So in this case, when I shoot in the up direction, the bullet will be at the player.x, right? So the same x coordinate as the player. And then player y -1, right? So above the player, right? Remember the y of 0 is at the top of the screen. Its x velocity will be 0, not moving the x direction, and its y velocity will be -1, moving up. So let's add in the rest of these. So shoot right. So player x +1, right, is going to the right. Player.y, same y coordinate as the player, moving to the right, x velocity of 1, and then y velocity of 0. Shoot down. We're going to have the same x coordinate as the player. The player y coordinate will be +1. Again, remember 0 is at the top of the screen, so if we increase the y coordinate, that moves the bullet down. X velocity of 0, not moving in the x direction, and y velocity of 1. And finally, shoot left. So we have the player x -1, player same coordinate as the player in the y direction. We have our x velocity of -1 moving to the left, and our y velocity of 0. All right, so let's go ahead and test this. So you can see I can shoot down. Let me move my player a little bit here. I can shoot to the right, I can shoot up, and I can shoot left, and I can shoot down. So you'll see those bullets move. We shoot a couple more bullets. Now you may have noticed there is a slight issue here. Look at the bullets whenever they reach the edge of the screen. So you'll see they just stop. They're not actually destroyed when they reach the edge of the screen. And even worse, if they're just bump into another bullet on the edge of the screen, they also just stop. So you get just all of these bullets just never disappearing. And there's one more issue here. Let me go ahead and move myself right next to this wall. So I stand right next to the wall and then I shoot. You notice it creates a bullet right on top of the wall. Right, so bullets can't move through walls. You'll see there's some bullets over here that got stuck on this wall. But if you stand right next to it and attempt to create a bullet on top of a wall, it does not stop you. So let me create one here. There we go. So let's go ahead and fix that as well. So let's go to AttemptWriteToGrid. So in our GameGrid class, we have our AttemptWriteToGrid. Or, sorry, WriteToGrid, actually. This is, well, I suppose you can call the function whatever you want, right? But part of the issue is that we're not treating it as an AttemptWriteToGrid. Right, whenever I shoot, that should be AttemptWriteToGrid. I suppose the good news is that if I forget, it will warn me when I attempt to build. So let me just build this and see if I missed any. Yes, here we go. So at the beginning when I created all those initial things. There we go. Okay, build succeeded. Okay, so we've successfully renamed it to AttemptWriteToGrid, but we need to change the actual code. So, okay, so if we check that these coordinates are valid, and then let's also check and make sure that there is nothing currently in that grid square. So we're just going to check that grid in the brackets g.x, g.y, right, our coordinates of our game object is equal to null. So there is nothing in that square. So let me save that and run it. And now let's try and create a bullet on top of a wall. All right, so the wall's below me. Let's create a bullet below me, and doesn't work. Okay, so we fixed that bug, and now we just need to fix the bullets running into walls bug, right? Because you can see this bullet here, for example, has ran into the wall and stopped, right? Remember, if I shoot bullets, they will just hit the wall and stop. So let's go ahead and fix that error now. Okay, so let's fix this error. I'm going to add a new function to GameGrid.cs. It's going to be called BulletMovementAttemptWriteToGrid. And if you look at, where is it? Movement attempt write to grid. It's going to be very similar. It's just this function, but specifically for bullets. Let's go ahead and paste it here. Okay, so let's go over this line by line. Okay, bullet movement attempt write to grid. So it takes a bullet, an x new and a y new, right? So our previous coordinates are stored in b.x, b.y. We're going to check that our coordinates are valid, right? Check that they're within the grid. And you'll notice if that's not true, this is what's new here. If the coordinates are not valid, the object would go off the grid. The bullet gets deleted. So we set that space to null, and then we set b.delete to true. So this here, remember our bullet has a delete thing. So remember we have a list full of bullets. So just because I delete it from the grid doesn't mean it gets deleted from the bullet list. So I actually need to mark it for deletion from that list. That's what's going on here. Sorry, I skipped around a little bit. So that's our if and our else. And then looking inside this if statement here. Okay, so if we attempt to move into an empty space, we are successful, right? The thing at the grid x new, y new is B, our bullet moves into it. Our previous square is null. And then we set our new x and y coordinates, right? So our bullet x and y coordinates are set to the new coordinates. Else, so we tried to move into empty space. If we're not moving into an empty space, here, if we try and move into a wall, the bullet gets deleted, right? So you'll remember we had bullets piling up across the edge of the screen. If you also look closely, you notice they also pile up against walls. So we want to stop that from happening. So if a bullet hits a wall, it gets destroyed. Okay. So there's one more thing we need to add here, and that is our delete, right? So we set delete to true. Okay, great. We need to actually delete it. So let me go to move bullets. So whenever the bullets are moved, we're going to delete the ones that need to be deleted, right? And here we go, bullet list.remove all, b.delete. So if delete is true, it will remove it. Okay, so let's go ahead and test that. So let me move here. Let's shoot some bullets. And so they've reached the edge of the screen, and they are not being deleted. Okay. What happens if I try and shoot it into a wall? Not deleted. Okay, so something is missing here. Right here. So move bullets, we're calling movement attempt right to grid, which does work as far as the bullet will move, but we're not calling our special code specifically for bullets. So remember, we created a new function called bullet movement attempt right to grid. So now if I call that, let's see if that fixes it. So shoot some bullets. There we go. So now if they were going to go off the edge of the screen, they disappear. And now if they would go into a wall, they disappear. Excellent. Okay, so that is bullets added. We can now successfully shoot bullets. The bullets don't destroy walls, and the bullets don't stack up against the edge of the screen. Awesome. I will see you next time. Bye.